The Israeli authorities typically ban aid organisations from filming out of plane windows as aid is dropped into Gaza. But now, ITV has shared some footage that was filmed from the windows during a recent Jordanian airdrop. The scale of devastation seen across Gaza is freshly shocking. It coincides with a visit to Australia by leading human rights campaigner and former head of Human Rights Watch, Kenneth Roth. He led the organisation for 3 decades and has just released a book, Righting Wrongs. Kenneth Roth, welcome to 7:30.
Pleasure to be with you, Sarah.
Is the international community impotent or unwilling in the face of Prime Minister Netanyahu's decision to prolong this war?
I think it's more unwilling. Many governments have voiced their outrage. There is increasing movement towards sanctioning the Israeli officials who were responsible. There's increasing recognition of the legitimacy of the arrest warrants issued by the International Criminal Court. But frankly, the one person who has leverage over Netanyahu is Trump. He alone could condition the arms sales and military aid on an end to the mass atrocities being committed in Gaza. I don't think it's impossible to push Trump to do that. He is breaking with Netanyahu in various ways. He's spoken about the starvation. He's not yet at that stage, but I think it's quite possible to get him there, and that's what it's going to take to end these war crimes.
Did anything significant that you're aware of come out of the visit of his envoy, Witkoff, to Gaza, looking at the aid the other day?
I have to say, I was disappointed by that visit because the Israeli government is imposing a deliberate starvation strategy. We wouldn't have this massive starvation if the Israeli government had not blocked for 11 weeks any food coming in. And now, rather than allowing the UN to distribute the food in a way that has proven very effective, it has set up its own handful of distribution sites where Palestinians have to walk miles to get there, and then hundreds upon hundreds are shot when they show up. So, of course, this is not working. And the idea that the U.S. will give a little bit more money to this utterly inadequate scheme is not the answer to the starvation strategy.
Now, there has been an announcement from the organisation inside the Israeli government that works with the military, that organises the delivery or runs the aid going into Gaza, or allows it to go in, I should say, rather. Now, they've announced that the private sector will now be allowed to bring some goods, some food into Gaza, which should mean more food is available. Is that, do you think, the result of international pressure? Why are we seeing a slight change?
Well, clearly, Prime Minister Netanyahu is feeling pressure. The world is outraged by seeing starving children die.
Does he feel pressure? That's what I'm not sure about.
Well, I don't think he's feeling much domestic pressure. He is recognizing that even in the United States, the Republican Party is splitting on what he's doing. Democrats are now opposed to it. So his main benefactor...
Some Republicans, especially, MAGA Republicans in the base.
Exactly. So Trump is not indifferent to public opinion. Netanyahu is a sophisticated guy. He sees that he's losing the American public and therefore could lose Trump. At this stage, though, these are token efforts. He basically is letting drips and drabs of food in. The answer to the starvation is to open the gates, to allow the 500 to 600 trucks of food that were coming into Gaza, but Netanyahu stopped, as of last March, to let those come in. That's what it's going to take, not a little bit here and a little bit there.
If there is any kind of substantial change, if there is anything that builds on this announcement today, what impact would that have on the International Criminal Court's warrants of arrest for Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant as well, because they were over allegations of using starvation as a weapon of war?
Precisely. Those are blatant war crimes. They violate the Fourth Geneva Convention requirement that an occupying power allow access to humanitarian aid to a population in need. That defines Gaza. The fact that Netanyahu committed this crime for months upon months, that he stops is not a defense to those months upon months in which he was committing the crime.
But given the amount of pressure that has come on the court and the prosecutor Khan, is it possible that if the situation is resolved in the real world that you have lived in while you were directing Human Rights Watch for all of that time, is it possible that that actually has an impact on those prosecutions?
No.
No.
The fact that these arrest warrants have been issued, this crime is going to be prosecuted. And frankly, Trump's sanctions against the International Criminal Court chief prosecutor and now 4 judges are blatant obstruction of justice. I mean, Trump himself could be charged with a crime for that. I'm not sure that's going to happen, but there is no way that that pressure is going to lead to removal of those charges.
I want to ask you about the momentum that we think we can read towards the UN meeting in September, where a number of countries have said they will recognise a Palestinian state. The Australian government is committed to doing so, but it hasn't said when it'll do so. Is this the right moment for this momentum?
I think it's understandable reaction to, frankly, what many people have, I think, rightly described as genocide in Gaza. And so governments are saying, how do we show our outrage? Well, one way to do that is to recognize a Palestinian state. Fair enough, but let's not, read too much into this act, because it is a symbolic act. It doesn't change the reality on the ground in Gaza. And so we shouldn't allow that to absolve governments of the responsibility to keep pressuring the Israeli government to stop bombing and starving Palestinian civilians in Gaza.
Now, within the complexities around those commitments, including Australia's commitment that it will happen at some stage, are stipulations expressed in different ways by the Canadians, by the British, and by the Australians. And those conditions are the demilitarisation of Gaza, for Hamas to exit, and also for political reform inside the Palestinian Authority, who would, in this idea, take over. How many of these commitments could be secure in any way as soon as September?
Well, first of all, I think we have to recognize the Palestinian Authority is a corrupt body. It hasn't allowed an election in decades.
Next question, right.
So it's going to take major reform there. Hamas is a brutal military dictatorship. Hamas has said that it would contemplate disarming and leaving Gaza if there were a clear path to a Palestinian state. If we accept that as a negotiating position, then the main obstacle is Netanyahu, who basically has said, over my dead body, there's not going to be a Palestinian state. And the only way to get past that comes back to President Trump. It comes back to his enormous leverage, the $3.8 billion annual military aid that he gives to Israel, the massive flow of arms. If he were to say, this only continues if you allow the Palestinian state that allows us to stop the slaughter in Gaza, things like this can happen.
And what about the Palestinian Authority? What about Abbas? Because you've just been very clear, your views on the Palestinian Authority. I think they've committed to elections to be held during next year. Is that enough? Is there enough in that to see potential for reform in the Palestinian Authority? Can they be partners for peace?
Well, I think, elections in a context where there's not free speech, where there's not free ability to form political parties and to contest the elections are not meaningful. And so we shouldn't get caught up on mere balloting. We should insist first on the emergence of a free media, civil society, political groups, and in that context, then democracy becomes meaningful.
I want to ask you a question, very domestic question about Australia. We've got a new position here, an anti-Semitism envoy. There was some debate when she delivered her first report about how we understand, how we define anti-Semitism, and she insists that this should underpin all her work. Now, she's using a particular definition of anti-Semitism. Is that definition, which is known as the IRA definition, it's technical, but you're the person to ask this, is this the right way to define anti-Semitism?
This is a completely counterproductive approach to fighting anti-Semitism. I mean, anti-Semitism is a real hazard.
And I should point out to our viewers that Kenneth Roth is the son of a Holocaust survivor.
And I'm Jewish. So anti-Semitism is a real issue for me. The IRA definition undermines the fight against anti-Semitism because it has come to be used over and over as an excuse to suppress legitimate criticism of Israel. And if that's what people think is happening when somebody talks about anti-Semitism, it cheapens the concept of anti-Semitism when it's very much needed. It basically prioritizes defense of the Israeli government over the defense of Jews around the world. There are alternative definitions, the so-called Jerusalem Declaration, the Nexus document, which have examples of legitimate criticism of Israel that are not anti-Semitism. Those are the way to go. That helps address the real problem without cheapening it by really defending the Israeli government as it commits atrocities.
Is there a role for an anti-Semitism envoy in a country like Australia? We obviously have existing hate laws. Do you think that the role here is justified and useful? We have experienced a severe uptick in anti-Semitism, but is that the right way to approach it, do you think?
I have no problem with having a special envoy focused on fighting anti-Semitism. But if that envoy is really pushing a definition of anti-Semitism that amounts to defending and stopping criticism of Israel, that is counterproductive. That is unhelpful for what Jews need to combat a genuine problem.
Now, I'd like to go on and talk about the extent of your career, but you arrive here in a moment of great intensity. I recommend the book, but Kenneth Roth, thank you very much indeed for joining us this evening.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.